So we're here today to talk about specially designed instruction. So if you didn't sign up for that, well, you get us anyway. So excited that you're here. My name's Katie Mosley, and helping me in the presentation in our training today will be Matt Johnson and Alana Harveth. So, as we thought about this training today, this is actually a training that we did last year as a full day training. And this year it's a 1.5 hour Zoom training. So, it's the first time we've presented it in this format in an hour and a half. So, bear with us if we have some timing issues. Just ask your questions if you have them, please, because one thing that we for sure want to accomplish in this is that you get all of your questions about specially designed instruction answered. So as we go through, you can put them in the chat. Whoever's doing the speaking, which I'm going to start, then Matt and Alana are manning that chat and they can let us know when there are questions. They're also very familiar with the presentation, and so they know if something is coming up as well. So just put those in the chat. But today we really want to look at defining specially designed instruction, and we want to look at what it is and why is it important for students. We also want to identify considerations for planning and implementing SDI. So we're going to talk about why kids might need it and in what situations they might need it. And as we go throughout, we have some case scenarios built in where we're going to stop and just do a little check of, okay, are we looking at SDI? Is this SDI? And then depending on time, we're going to take a look at more specific scenarios with students and look at, are they being provided SDI? If not, what is going on, and just talk through some situations like that. And if you folks have questions about your students, feel free to throw those in as well. So if you are not familiar with our center, or this might be your first webinar with us, I just want to say welcome. We are here. All of this writing basically says we're here to support Indiana teachers so that we can support students with disabilities, which in return really supports all students. And so we are very fortunate to be here today talking to you about this. I was asked to also say that if you are needing a certificate to prove that you attended this webinar, those will be sent within 24 to 72 hours. So just give us a day or a couple days before you get panicky. So if you don't receive a certificate by Monday, for sure reach out to one of us and we'll have all of our contact information at the end. And you can also find us online at iepta.org. So the Padlet link is in the chat. On that Padlet, you will find the PowerPoint to today's presentation. You'll also find some other various handouts. You'll have some links to some books that we will reference today. We certainly have books that we, the three of us, prefer over other books. It's not necessarily ones that our center says, these are the best, but just through our own experiences, we have found books that and resources that are more helpful than others. So you can scan that QR code, or you can put the Padlet code in. All right, so let's first just take a look at what is specially designed instruction. So if we look at like legal definitions of this, we see that specially designed instruction is adapting the content, the methodology, or delivery of instruction to address the unique needs of the child that results from a child's disability to ensure access of that general education curriculum. And that's a really big mouthful. So this comes from federal law, from IDEA, and it's been a law since 1975. But there is a push and has been a push for the last many years to really focus on SDI and focus on truly delivering it for those students who need it. So as we look to break down SDI, thought I had a slide here, but I'm not seeing it. If you had to define SDI for a new colleague or maybe someone who wasn't in education, how would you describe it with what you know now? So just throw some ideas in the chat, if you will. How would you describe SDI to someone? And here's the big definition. We're going to break this down quite a bit more, I promise, but I'm looking at the question how you do it from Leroy. So I am guessing, Leroy, if I am misinterpreting the way that you said this, let me know. But you want to know personally how you can implement SDI and how you can do it. So if I misunderstood that, let me know. That's kind of the direction I'm going to take with that question. And it's actually a whole section in here that we're going to get to. Okay. Alana or Matt, do you want to throw out a couple of words that you would use to define? Oh, it looks like we have some in the chat now.
Yeah, I see modified learning process to provide positive outcomes. I see some things that we're putting in the chat to make education accessible. What a student needs in order to learn and assess the the curriculum, and meeting a child at their level. So some good thoughts on SDI.
For sure. Okay, so when we look at specially designed instruction within the context of all of the other things that are occurring at school, this bullseye is spot on. And so this bullseye came from a book by Anne Benninghoff, and it's one we will reference a few times throughout this presentation, and it is linked in your Padlet. This book does a really great job of breaking SDI down even more than what we can do in this 90-minute presentation. If we look at all students in every school, what is available for every student, on the outside of this bullseye, we have universal design for learning. So that's a universal. That means it's for everyone. And universal design for learning is all about removing barriers from the environment to help students learn. So that's an option for everyone. Within that very proactive framework of universal design for learning, we have differentiated instruction. And so that's where we're looking at things like flexible grouping and adjusting some content or giving some different options for students. And again, this is a universal learning tool that can be used or learning framework, really, it's not a tool. But every child can have access to that. And then within that, we get multi-tiered systems of support. So this is really looking at a very specific part of MTSS, which is RTI. So we know that our students who may be a little behind might get into the RTI process. And so now they're getting a little more targeted intervention for a skill deficit. So those three things are for every student. In the middle of this target is specially designed instruction. And so this is for a small group of students who learn uniquely. And so one thing I want you to notice about this bullseye is that if you start on the inside and work your way out, it's all encompassing. So students who receive specially designed instruction should also receive that MTSS process and differentiated instruction, and universal design for learning. So these ideas are not four separate islands that need to be looked at independently. Rather, they need to be looked at something as functioning together in tandem. Okay, so there are three different areas that we can look to focus on when it comes to that specially designed instruction. Because that specially designed instruction, which I should have mentioned on this bullseye, is for those students who are eligible for special education services. So when we talk about their unique needs and the unique things that we do to address those needs, that's where we're looking at the SDI piece. So when you have like the student's IEP and you see the goals that they have, you're also going to see the SDI piece. And that's kind of like a roadmap that should tell you how to help that student learn the material. And so as we look at the how that student might need the material different, we're going to look at the content, the methodology, or the process. So let's take a look first at adapting the content. So this really refers to adapting what the students are learning. So we know that students with disabilities are expected to master the same standards as classmates without disabilities. So in order to do this, they need to be in that general education setting. And so we will talk about who can implement SDI later on, but it's an important thing for everyone who plays a part in the role of educating a child to know what that child's SDI is. But we do know too that standards can often be met by learning different content, maybe in a different way. So maybe we're going to change the order in which we're going to teach something or that child needs something taught. We could look at changing levels of complexity. And this is not modifying because we want to be sure that we're really keeping that distinguishing factors between accommodations and modifying. Because when we start to use the word modify, we're changing the curriculum or changing something. And so that's when we need to like examine what we are doing. But if our standards don't specify like it has to be grade level for XYZ, we can adjust the complexity or the level in which we are presenting the content that the student or the content in which the student is looking at or reviewing or reading. Maybe a student just needs additional skills to master that grade level content. That can be another way that we can look at adapting that content, what the student is getting. So just some examples, and there are a lot of different places where you can find some more specific examples for content, but something like an alternate text. So we could look at changing the order of the content, like we said earlier, but also we could look at eliminating sections. So if we have sections of text that aren't as important as the other material, maybe they're just added extra information in, but not parts of standards, we can look to take some of those sections out. But then we also need to look at expanding that core curriculum to address any compensatory skills that our students may have. For example, Braille. So if we have kiddos who can't see, we may need to give them their content in a different manner. Mobility training, learning sign language. There are also some, programs that you can look at to help with content. A lot of phonics-based programs have different interventions that can be used with students. So you can always take a look at those as well. All right, so in the chat, just how are you adapting content right now with your students? Or maybe thinking, okay, maybe I could do this to adapt content. So maybe you have a question about how you can adapt the content of what the child is taking in, what they're getting, the material, um, you can throw those in the chat and we can certainly answer those questions.
And we have one that came up here just talking about Glenda posed that is this where depth of knowledge comes into play. So thinking through, and I don't know if what your all take is on that question. I'm trying to make sure I grasp it the right way. Is that can be a conversation. What is the requirement? What is the are we sometimes we go beyond those pieces, so the depth of knowledge is not as deep as we might expect for other students. So that is a consideration. I don't know if I'm hitting the right tone in that question, but that's my take on that initially anyway.
You are, Matt. I just, when we get the depth of knowledge that has to come into play here too, along with everything else, I'm like, okay, can we adapt the depth of knowledge in with our SDI?
Well, I think that's a consideration when you talk about eliminating sections and those kind of pieces. Like, what do we have? What must we get from this process? What's the requirement as far as, and like Katie mentioned, there's different ways of getting that information to and from students, but thinking about, how deep do we need to go with this? And before we can move on, because some of this, sometimes we go more than what's required. And that's might be a interesting conversation to have for sure.
I think it's important too to look at depth of knowledge, because if you have a learning gap somewhere and the standard is asking students more of an application, then you can work down that depth of knowledge to see, okay, where is it that their skill gap lies? Maybe they don't understand the vocabulary to accompany the standard, but they have everything else in the middle. So just really using that depth of knowledge chart to kind of move up and down is a great tool to use as well.
What I'm seeing is most of our educational content is taught at a DOK of 3 or 4. My students are at a 1. So it's like, okay, I've got to connect the pieces here.
And I think we're going to get into, I know Amy had a comment there, and I think we're going to get into that here with the next, as we break down the SDI here further. We're going to touch on the reteaching piece and kind of the methodology. Those pieces are coming up. So I think that's great. We're thinking ahead already to we're already going in that direction. So I think it's going to be some good stuff here.
And Matt's right. That's a great segue into really adapting the methodology. So a lot of times, and Anne Benninghoff talks about this, that content is the thing that we want to try to adapt, when the reality is what most students need is adapted methodology. It's not necessarily what's being presented, but how it's being presented. So how students are being taught. And we can look at effect size of different strategies for instruction. And we know that lecturing has a negative effect size. And so if a student is in a classroom where it's lecture, 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 especially our students who have unique needs, they're going to be falling a little further behind. So that's why it's that idea of universal design for learning and differentiated instruction can be so important. Because if we're changing how we're teaching the child, and maybe we switch up and do a jigsaw one day, which has over a 1 point, I can't remember what it is, but it's 1 point something effect size, which is tremendous. So we know that switching up how even students who are not identified within our educational system, we know that the best practice for them too is to be taught in different ways. So with our students with disabilities, we can really look at those different instructional strategies of what's working, what interventions are working. And like with the content, if we're looking at an Orton-Gillingham intervention and it's not working, then we might change to Wilson or something different. So it's really using those things to make those adjustments as well, because we're progress monitoring and getting all of that good data. So like I alluded to earlier, we just know that there are some teaching methods that are more effective than others and efficient for students with disabilities. And it again, like our center, we say we help students with disabilities, but the byproduct of that is that we help students, all students. And so we know that when we take some of these methodologies that special education teachers have been taught in school, they bring that specialization, that skill set of how to teach differently with our students. And so this is the one that really should be most common. So as we look at some just examples, we're looking at direct instruction. We are looking at explicit instruction. And those two have great effect size. We know that our students need direct and explicit instruction. Something else that we can do is modeling. So we're constantly modeling what we're doing. We're reminding them of what our expectation might be. We're modeling how we want to problem solve. We're modeling how we're thinking through a behavior for the students. Chaining is always great for students, talking about, like first you're doing this and then this, and then you're going to do this. So really chunking and breaking those steps down for students is going to be very beneficial. And you can do it forwards. So you start with the very first step and then you move to the next step and then the next step. Or you can use backward chaining where you show the final example. Okay, this is what my body is going to look like when I'm calm, or this is what my project is going to look like when it's finished. And now we're going to work backwards. And then we'll start it from the beginning. So showing the students the steps in reverse can also be helpful. And then really just looking at that task analysis piece, which kind of goes into the chaining part, but really breaking down the different pieces of whether it be an academic, a piece of SDI, or a behavior that's targeted with SDI. Really breaking that down for students and then building on top of that. Again, just some more examples, that intensive phonemic awareness instruction. So how we're teaching them, and the multi-sensory methods with, we have different programs where you can like touch math. Students are getting math in just different ways and using alternate math strategies, which can really be helpful for all students because, I was that student who I could excel in anything. And so it was just assumed that I excelled in math. And I struggled with math and I had to fake it for a lot of years because it was, well, this is how we teach it. You're in the high class, whatever. But really looking at some of these things can be best practices for all of our students. So now as you're thinking about the methodology, the way the content is presented to the student, does that bring up other questions, or do you have any really great examples of how you are adapting methodology in that SDI piece with your students? I haven't been. Oh, go ahead.
One good, we had one good. I think this is something that we all have run across. We have students that are, in this particular case that we have here, we're students in third grade, and we're doing fractions, but they're they're working on skills that are more typical for kindergarten, first grade students. So how do we engage that student in that grade level work as they're moving forward? I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is really, and a lot of classrooms rely on these anyway, but looking at different manipulatives, looking at different visuals for students, not just because, it depends on the situation, which we don't know exactly what the classroom looks like, but thinking about those, just as a way of opening that conversation, manipulatives are the first thing that come to my mind. But what other things are we thinking of when you have that situation? Yeah, it's the touch math. A lot of that's something I relied on a lot with students in middle school and high school even sometimes. So that was a good, I guess a nice tool to have in your back pocket there. What other things come to mind as we're starting with those? I appreciate when we share our experiences too. I think it's important that get a chance to see what you guys are seeing. Yep.
I think too, when we think about multisensory methods anymore, I think every generation says this, but we really can get overstimulated. And so we might be able to be watching something, but we might also need to see the captions. And now we have so many different accessibility features that can be used that could be, they don't necessarily have to be SDI. They're just more of a supplementary aid or service for our students. So those are things to consider too. And I bet there are things that we're all doing that we don't even really think about that we're doing that might be for the benefit of students. Okay. Okay, Lisa, I just pulled up the chat. Yes, the modeling, again, it's the I do it, we do it, and then you do it. That's a wonderful approach. And sometimes I do it, I do it, I do it, I do it, right? And then we do it. And then finally our students can do it. All right, so the third part of SDI is adapting that delivery of instruction. So here we're looking at when the student is taught and where the student is taught. So we're looking at location. Is it the general education classroom? That's the preferred, but sometimes we have to have a separate setting. If our students in OT, they might need to be pulled out, but if they're working on handwriting, we might be able to push in to the classroom. And then we can take a look at the group size. So we've got whole group, we've got large group, small group, individual, independent, so many different varieties when we look at group size. And then we can really examine that dosage piece. So maybe our kiddos need more time. Maybe they just need, it's like time and a half seems to be the big one that we just need a little bit more time. Maybe the student reads a little slower, so they need a little bit more time to work on a test or a quiz. But then we can also look at those pieces of pre-teaching and reteaching. So those can be so important. Sometimes the student doesn't need necessarily longer to complete the assignment, but maybe they just needed some more background information. So we might pre-teach with something, a concept. We know they're going to get a new concept taught. Activate some of that prior knowledge and then pre-teach that skill so that when they go into the classroom or into the setting where they need the skill, they'll be more likely with their peers. But then we can also add in a reteach piece. And some students might need pre-teaching, the actual teaching, and then reteaching. And so that's a consideration too. Reteaching is wonderful. And reteaching, you can really change the methodology. If the student was in a class with a whole group and it was a whole group activity and the student wasn't following along very well and you were reteaching it and you're reteaching it one-on-one, that's adapting, the methodology, but you're also adapting your delivery of instruction. So we've talked about some of these already. I kind of jumped the gun a little bit, but just some different instructional techniques and strategies. Marilyn Friend has a great book, and I believe we have her resource linked on our Padlet as well. She does a lot with like acronym-based learning, and I bet most of you guys do too. It's about maybe you want to work on writing like a complete paragraph, and you have an acronym for like restating the question, answering the question, citing the source, and then providing the evidence. So that RACE method. For math, it's like PEMDAS, we want the parentheses, the exponents, and so on. So using those strategies with kids is wonderful. We've talked about the multisensory instruction a little bit. And then again, maybe students need more practice, and maybe they need more steps. And so maybe there are some steps that some kiddos don't need to be taught because they can just generalize or they can fill in the gaps when some of our students can't quite do that. So we might need to add in a few extra steps for them. And again, more review. So maybe they just need some more of that reteaching being done. So what questions on examples or I'm sorry, on delivery of instruction do you have, or what are you seeing used in your building that's a really great example of delivery of instruction? Anyone has any great ideas? And you should have the ability to unmute yourself if you would rather speak.
I can go first.
Yeah.
Like I'm handing out like sheets for my psychology algebra in algebra. Like give them sense starters or have something to help them deliver a happy happy with a goal of theirs academically.
I love the sentence starters.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything good going on with delivery?
I did think early on there was a comment about what he talked about reteaching information came down to with I guess algebra is a kind of a common theme in some of these conversations, but just having that time to I guess that's also important to think about, that these students wouldn't be successful without that support. These are meeting a need these students have, so they need the reteaching piece. And just to go back a little bit to what Kay was talking about with the other things we can deliver, universal design, differentiation, and MTSS are all great tools for everybody. But keep in mind, things like reteaching could be nice for other students to be involved, but this student must have it in order to make progress. So that's the importance we have with all these things when we're making that connection, that some of these things are nice and like Katie pointed out, are very useful and I guess beneficial for all students, but some of our students just have to have this. They must have this support in order to make progress toward the goals they have. So that don't forget that connection. Special design instruction is in response to student needs, building them toward their goals. So that's a big connective piece that we have to keep an eye on.
Thanks for bringing that back around, Matt. Sometimes I get carried away and forget to throw that caveat in there. So I greatly appreciate that.
That's great.
All right, so what's the purpose? So we know the 3 different areas, but what's the purpose? And this really segues nicely into what Matt was saying, is that it's really looking to address those unique needs that result from a student's disability. So we know they have this disability. We know that they need something different. We want to keep in mind that we know that accommodations are not specially designed instruction. Accommodations are things that can be used for all students. And so when we look at accommodations, we have accommodations in the IEP. That's a little different. We're going to do a little game here in just a minute with accommodations or not. But keep that in mind. The accommodation itself isn't necessarily SDI. More than likely, it's not SDI. And classroom tools are not SDI. So like a hundreds chart or something like that. The next purpose is to ensure access of the child to the general education curriculum. And you might think, oh, I've heard these words before. That's because it comes from the definition that we went over in the very first part. So we have to give our students access to that general education curriculum because all of our students are general education students first. And they just might get special support and services through special education. But the general education classroom provides the most equitable access to that general education curriculum. The general education teacher brings that content expertise. They bring the pacing expertise, they bring the standards expertise. And so all students will benefit from getting that instruction from the expert. And really, we look at meeting educational standards. So we're not just looking at exposing them, but they have to meet them. We don't just expose them to iLearn. We want them to meet the progress in iLearn. So one of my favorite quotes, and this came from the Anne Benninghoff book, you can't teach a child to swim by taking them out of the pool. And so we want our kids to be able to learn, to have that content, that grade level knowledge. The best place that they're going to get that is in that general education setting. So we want to try to pull them out as little as we can based on their needs. And that's the important part, is that we always have to look at the child's needs. All right, so we're going to do a little poll game activity here. So Alana's going to launch a poll here in just a second, and she's going to give you something. Here we go. Materials in Braille is the first one. What do you think it is? Do you think that is a piece of specially designed instruction, or do you think that is an accommodation or support?
So you guys should be able to access the poll on your own and decide. And I think the biggest thing that our clue is it has to be a teacher behavior. So it has to be instruction to make it specially designed instruction. So instruction has to be part of that. So we'll let you do that, but hopefully everybody can access that poll and have a couple of seconds to think through those. There's only 5 questions.
It's anonymous grading, so don't be afraid to take a stab at it. It's just for fun, provides us some great talking points as we go through this.
I think there's some licensing issues, but we could do the Jeopardy song here in the background. I think that might cause some issues down the road, though. So we'll keep
Matt, you can probably sing it.
Yeah, we'll wait. We'll do this on round 2. I'll practice. See how that goes.
It looks about 30 people have responded out of 66. So thank you.
That's pretty amazing.
You guys are good. 38 out of
Awesome.
66. Yeah. We're trying to get you as much interaction as possible on a virtual. We know it's a lot of sit and get, but we're trying to mix it up for you guys.
You can always get up and move around the room if you feel so inclined.
Definitely.
I'm not going to stop you from doing that, but
no.
Alana, you want to talk us through this poll?
I'm going to end it. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. So I have 46. I have 47. People are still kind of answering, but I can end it if you want me to end it. I can do that. All right, I'm going to end it. 47 out of 65 participated, so that is really great.
You might want to keep it up as you go through it.
I'm going to share results right now. Yep.
Okay.
Can you see the results? Can you see the results? I'm sorry. Now it's gone from mine.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I
All
think
right.
so. The people are
All
seeing
right.
it.
All right. So the first one was okay, materials in Braille. So just giving materials in Braille. SDI was 29%, and accommodation or support would be 71%, and it is an accommodation or support. And the reason is because the materials doesn't have any instruction. The student still has to have that instruction to be able to read it. So that is the difference between that one. And we're going to see it kind of later, but the small group instruction in the writing process. So there is implied instruction in the writing progress that would be SDI, which 67% got that correct. So you are going through the writing process, you're modeling how to do that. That would be specially designed instruction. Checklist, is that SDI or an accommodation or support? Majority, 67% said an accommodation or support, and that is correct because you do not have to have an IEP to use a checklist. There's no instruction there. You can give it to all your class. So there's not any instruction going on. There's not a teacher behavior teaching something to that student. Number 4, the difference between number 1 and 4 is direct Braille code instruction. So this is where it would be SDI, 80% got it right, which is great. The teacher is teaching how to do that Braille code instruction with the student. And then the last one, the sticky notes or highlighters to mark key points. Accommodations would be what you guys said, 60%. And yes, you don't have to, everybody can have sticky notes. Anyone could have highlighters. Anyone could do all of that in your classroom. So that is why it's an accommodation and not SDI. There's no teacher instruction behavior to teach the students. It was just kind of giving all of that. So that is your results. Katie and Matt, do you want to say anything about those?
Just since a couple of these were kind of close, I know one of the things that we had the very first one was on materials in Braille kind of thing. And one of the things to keep in mind is teaching the students how to do something is especially, so if I'm teaching you how to use a graphic organizer, instructing you on how to use a communication device or teaching you Braille, that's specially designed instruction. It's when you incorporate it in a given this thing, then they're going to do something else. So, the accommodation, well, like a graphic organizer would be an accommodation later on. I'm going to give you this tool so that to help you do something I'm going to teach you about. So that's sometimes where things get a little bit fuzzy there because I have to teach you how to use this device first. That's SDI, but then incorporating it in lessons going forward after I've learned the skill, it becomes an accommodation. So hopefully that sounded a lot more clear in my head before I said it than when I actually said it. So hopefully that came across, but that's sometimes where we get tripped up. But I think that you guys did a really good job with that and capturing that content. So appreciate that.
Thanks, Matt. So the key word is really taught. Is it being taught? I think that if I had to sum it up in one word, that would be it. Okay, so let's take a look. This is kind of written in the negative, but what SDI is not. It is not differentiation, right? It can be a piece of that universal support for all students, but SDI is for students who need it, right? For our students who have special education eligibilities. It's the same thing for universal design for learning. It's also not homework help. It's not just an open resource room door to go in and get help with a problem if you have it. It is going to be taught, so it's going to be systematic. It's not just content support. So just having a paraprofessional in a classroom, that's not an example of SDI. Accommodations, as we just looked at, they are different. There are more supplementary aids and supports. If we are teaching how to use those supplementary aids and supports, now we've got SDI. And modifications are not SDI either. So just remember that at the heart of special education is this SDI piece. It's really what makes it unique for our learners. So SDI, and I've tried to think of examples. Sometimes it's kind of difficult to think of other examples, but SDI is not just for academics. So it can be for organization. So if we have students who with severe ADHD and they've got a lot of organizational problems, then we can create SDI to help with those. The same with behavior.
My husband tried it and was
You
able
know,
to.
we have students who may need those behavioral supports. They may need to be taught specific behavioral skills. And then we can look communicative, functional, physical, motor. So we've got all of these different areas. Marilyn Friend does a great job of bringing all of these different areas in for SDI in some information that she shares out that is also linked on the Padlet. So if there's an area on here that you think we left out, please feel free to throw that in the chat as well. And if I had to guess, I would say a lot of you see that academic SDI piece. If you are in behavior, maybe. So if you're seeing other examples, throw those in the chat too, just so that we can check some of those out and see what's going on in other schools out there. Are we good in the chat or do we have questions?
Let me unmute myself there. We do have one point, and this is a good question, and this is just want to make sure we're clear moving off from this process too, is using text to speech or vice versa an example of specially designed instruction? So that's a good question. That's one that comes up quite a bit. So you want to speak to that, Katie, or do you want me to? I can go ahead.
You go right on.
So this is what we would term as an accommodation. And text to speech, speech to text are accommodations. There's not that instructional component is not there. It gives them access to information and ways to express their understanding. So it's an accommodate allows that student to operate and access the curriculum and keep up with their peers without having to necessarily be able to write or to read that grade level text. So if I'm unable to read that grade level text, I can get text to speech so I can listen to that. If I struggle to write or for whatever reason communication is an issue, I can do some speech to text devices tools so I can express myself and still be a part of that instruction. But those two things allow me to be a part of the instruction and allow me to participate in the class more fully. So it's not in and of itself an instructional component. It allows me to access instruction and participate in the curriculum. So it's
and
not.
Matt, too, if I wanted to think of it in this way, tell me your opinion. But when I'm looking at a goal and I'm looking at the SDI to achieve that goal, really it needs to be a year-long process,
Yep.
right? I want something involved enough that it's not going to be just, oh, we met this goal 2 days after.
It's not a one-off kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes.
And well, that speaks to goals a bit too, but these are things that are, well, I guess with accommodations, they're there to I don't know, mitigate a lifelong concern for the student. So if it's text to speech or speech to text, it's making that student, it's allowing them to access content from there. And special design instruction also does that, but it does that a different way in that it addresses those specific deficits. So if a student is struggling in reading and we identify where that need is, they need additional instruction or support to raise that skill level, to give them that additional instruction or additional time so they can process whatever the case is. So we have, so hopefully that student can move along with their peers in these different areas. And I think it's important that it's not as simple as just saying they need SDI or they need accommodations. We have to figure out where they need it and what they need, and then we can move forward. We're going to talk more about that, I think, moving on. If you let me talk too long, I'll take up the whole time. So I got to keep moving.
You are good. All right. So some questions you can ask yourself, and I guess this is another great segue from that question into how do I know it's SDI? And so really, as we're looking at that, the first thing we want to look at is what's the student's present levels of performance? is that those have to match up, those have to be aligned. And that SDI has to address a goal within that student's IEP. So it's just another important piece that we need to keep in mind. It has to be research or evidence based. So those two words are key: research, evidence. We have to have that for our SDI. And again, going back to the being taught, it has to be teacher led. And we're going to talk about what teacher led means. Don't let that term, because when we say teacher, everybody has a different definition of teacher. Special education teacher, general education teacher, paraprofessional, thinking of all these people within the school. So we're going to answer that question in a moment. But it has to be systematic instruction. And I mentioned that earlier, right? It has to be planned. It has to be delivered over time. Like we said, it's not just a one and done sort of deal. And then we need to evaluate that SDI based on the data that we're getting back from the students' performances. The instruction must be needed by the student with a disability. So if it's not needed, we don't need to put it in there. We don't want to tie our hands with all of these different types of SDI when the student may not really need it. So look at what does the student need, and let's get the student that. It's going to look at different learning or other deficits. And here's the big part that's preventing the student from reaching that grade level standard. And so grade level standard is important. We want to look for that skill to transfer and maintenance. We want it to generalize to another setting. We don't want it to be something that a student is only using in one classroom. We want it in all classrooms, and eventually, like Alana had mentioned in her comment, generalizing it out into the world to where it's actually something that has benefited them as they age. So these guiding questions came from Anne Benninghoff's book. We don't want to pass these off as our own when they are certainly not. So she asks, is it special? And I love that question. And that's a great question that we can pose to team members when we sit down at a case conference committee, or we're looking at developing a new IEP for a student. And we need to ask ourselves that, is it special? Because if it's not, then it's not going to be SDI. It must be something different from that typical general education practice. And then again, we're looking at the addressing the child's needs, the child's unique needs. It has to be related to the IEP goal, like we said on the previous slide, and again, being instructional. And then is it a growing skill that we mentioned, that it can be transferable? So when we think about this, it's like, what can we do that's really going to impact this child's life? What are we going to do that's going to be a game changer for them? And ultimately, we want to build that independence. And so if we're not building that independence, we might need to re-examine it as well. Okay. SDI or best practice. So here we go. Here's the goal. Alana or Matt, would you be willing to go through these? My voice is like not playing nice.
All right, so we're going to have you guys work in the chat, and we are not really concerned too much about the goal. We know it's not met. We know this is just a scenario. We're really mostly worried about if it's SDI or just best practice. So I'm going to read this to you, and in the chat, you're going to either put it's just best practice, it's just good teaching, or do you think it's SDI, and why or why not? And Katie kind of went before on that last slide about those questions. Is it special? Is there instruction? All of this, are you able to progress monitor it? Is the student able to transfer it on his own? So we're going to just talk about Matt initiating tasks when verbally directed by a teacher or a staff. That's just kind of what we want them to do. And the special education teacher provides services 3 times a week. When she is present, she makes eye contact with Matt before repeating the teacher's verbal instruction. She models how to start the routine and verbally praises him when he begins. She circulates around the classroom, but checks in on Matt more than other students. So are these things that the teacher is doing in this class, is that specially designed instruction, or do you think that's just good teaching? And I just want you guys to put it in the chat what you guys think. And if you have any like thoughts on expanding that, like why or why not, you can do that too. I'm gonna let you guys go through that. I appreciate you guys. All right, the majority of people said good teaching, thumbs up. Yes, yes, it is just best practice, not SDI, because she should check it. Yes, they should check on all students. Matt might need a little bit more attention, but it is, everybody's right. It's good teaching. There's no, I'm trying to see if there's anything in the chat that it kind of explains it a little bit further, but is it unique or special? Nope. Is there any instruction going on? The teacher's instructing on anything? No, just verbally checking in, making sure that he has a little bit more attention and he's on task, but there's not actual teaching. Very good, everybody. Great job. Matt, do you want to add anything on that, or we're going to move on? We're going to move on. All right, so this is the second one. Again, I need your input. Thumbs up or thumbs down. Is it good teaching or SDI? And if you think it's SDI, why do we think it's SDI? Again, it's the same sort of task. So Matt will initiate tasks when verbally directed by the teacher or the staff. This time it's a little bit more, but special education teacher arrives in the classrooms a few minutes prior to the activity. She pulls Matt and two of his peers to a small group as helpers. The teacher displays 3 pictures of the cleanup process and asks the students to place them in the correct sequence as quickly as they can. She uses a pre-taught gesture for listen so that Matt listens closely as she asks his peers to discuss how fast they should work. The students choose a goal time for finishing the cleanup task, and Matt sets the time on the timer. She then turns the sequence pictures over and asks Matt to recall the steps and say them aloud. When the classroom teacher gives the direction to clean up, Matt gets to work while the special education teacher observes and collects behavioral data. So if you think this is SDI, put the parts that we talked about, well, Katie talked about, why is it, what evidence do we have that it's SDI? What part makes it SDI? Yep.
In the chat, SDI seems to be the prevailing answer. And we had an answer of small group, and then data collection can be progress monitored. Another small group.
Perfect. So I see a bunch of great evidence on that, just not why it's SDI, but you explained some of those things that Katie talked about, that there's a teacher instruction of the skill and progress monitoring. And hopefully the student would be able to, can you imagine the student being able to do that themselves in the future? Because that's what we're trying to get to, right? Great job. Thanks. I hope, Katie, I don't know if your voice is back. I won't take your thunder.
I can attempt it again. I really want to pull my weight here, but so SDI is a shared responsibility, like I said earlier. And as you think about people in your building, who are your go-to people when you need a solution? Do you have those people? Is it a team? Maybe the team is you. Maybe it's you doing it. Are you open to out-of-the-box thinking and solutions? So those are 2 very great things that make any educator a great educator, right? You've got to be open to this out-of-the-box thinking. What about out-of-the-box solutions? And then how do you communicate SDI with all staff? That's an important consideration. Sometimes communicating the SDI might just be giving your general education teachers the IEP at a glance. Yes, you're communicating with them, but are you going through it with them? Are you showing them what it might look like? So here's my soapbox about who can provide SDI. This is a shared responsibility. It can be the special education teacher, but it can also be the general education teacher. And under the direction of a teacher, of a licensed teacher, it could be a paraprofessional. So it is important for general education teachers to stay in a case conference as long as possible. Oftentimes, and I was a general education teacher, so I am saying this about myself, that I would enter a case conference, I would give a present level, I would talk about the student, and then I thought it was my time to go. I thought I was just dismissed after that. And I missed out on the importance of going through that student's goals with the family, with the teachers, and looking at that piece of SDI, how I could best help that student, especially if they're in my class. I can help them, right? I know that the general education environment is the best place for that student. And so anything that I could do as a general education teacher, I should have done, but I didn't understand that. I didn't understand it because it was never really communicated to me. And so that's something important that you can think about. I know general education teachers, we often say, oh, we've got to hurry off because we've got to do this and this and this. And while that's true, that student should be our #1 priority at the moment. So just a consideration. All right, so starting with present levels. Matt, were you gonna take over here?
That is, sure.
Okay.
Absolutely. This is really kind of getting into the nuts and bolts of this process. We talked in terms of what specially designed instruction is and what it isn't, and this is really getting into planning for it, developing specially designed instruction. Because if we're going to go into this process, the starting point is really in present levels. And I'm not going to read this word for word for you, but it's really just speaking that there should be a direct relationship between the present levels and the other components of the IEP. That's the bottom line. So as we spell those things out, and I guess the connection I like to draw when we get into this process is where specially designed instruction fits in that development of an IEP is really the present levels are what we know about the student right now. The information, the skills the students what the student's capable of, and where their challenges are throughout that school day. And then based on the needs, those challenges the student has, specially designed instruction is what our plan is. What's our plan to do, to fix, not to fix these things, but to address those needs? What's the big idea? What are we as adults going to do? So the best definition, simplest definition I could think of for specially designed instruction is it's an adult response to the student's needs. So us as adults, what do we plan to do? And the way we measure success or failure of that process is through measuring progress on goals and developing those. So that's the big connection between the pieces. So what we say in present levels is connected. And that leads us to the next slide, which is the planning. I'm going to have to ask Katie to be my clicker on that since she's got control of the PowerPoint there. So one of the concerns a lot of times is, what should we be looking for to use when we're working with students with specially designed instruction? I know that Katie alluded to Hattie's work, which is a meta-analysis of a lot of effective tools for education. So that's one resource you can definitely look to. But we have to look for whatever instructional techniques that we're going to use for our students. We have to look for evidence to suggest they are effective. Is that research-based, evidence-based practices are, I guess, the hallmark of everything we're doing in education, and they should always. So, think about the things as effective for the disability, the student's age, the setting, the subject area, and even the specific skills that we're looking for. So consider those things. Is it effective for those areas of need that exist for that student. So you go to the next slide there. So this particular one is just a reminder for us to, that special design instruction is intended to address the student's IEP goals. It's tailored for them. We can adjust it, but it's there to help us meet those goals. But we also have to understand the characteristics students have that's going to shape the way we teach and work with our students. So it's important that we understand the characteristics of the disability and the student personally, so we can help tailor the instruction there. And I guess one of the things that we can get a little stuck on, and I'm not sure it's something you guys have considered, but it can sound like what we're saying is every student needs to be instructed individually. And that's really not what we're saying here. We just have to be aware of the student's individual needs as we instruct them. So we make sure we spend the time giving the information. Even if I'm working in a small group of students that all have IEPs, we may be working on the same general area, but I'm aware of their individual needs. I know what the individual students might need, and I'll make sure they get that in that setting and that day. So those are just some things to keep in mind. And when you're planning for this piece, this is from Betty Hoff's book as well, and that's a common theme throughout that we lean on her book pretty heavily. It's important that we clarify, as we're planning, we clarify our targets. And think ahead as you're working and planning together. And that's something Katie mentioned. I think we can't stress enough that this is a team effort. If it's just me as a special ed teacher doing this alone, then it's not going to be as successful as a group effort here. So, if we're going to be working together, if your general education teacher is going to be providing special design instruction, they need to be part of this process so that we can come to a conclusion together. We need to be looking at what we're trying to teach, look ahead to difficult moments. That's an important piece with any instruction, I think. Look ahead to where your, I guess, the tripwires are, where the student's going to struggle, or this class or this group is going to struggle with an activity or lesson, and anticipate as much as you can, and lay the groundwork of support before that happens. That's one of the biggest, as I don't know how many folks maybe should have asked that initially, how many really relatively new teachers we have in the group today, but that's one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give you, is to take the time to look ahead and anticipate. You're not always going to use those safety measures you built in, but it sure is nice to have them when you need them. So look, where might students struggle in these kind of things? What can we do if this doesn't go as planned, and build supports? And that'll come with time as you start building that up too. Choose the IEP goals, to address and look at that. I guess the metacognition process is one of those things about thinking ahead to what, think out loud. That's the approach I would use. What the steps are to a process. What do we go through? How do we get there? What things are the students going to do? And the illusion that, I guess the example I always bring up, or when we had to give kids, I remember in grade school that assignment where we had to write directions for making a peanut butter sandwich. And you think through all the steps that kids have to go through and how messed up that gets if you aren't explicit in your description of each step along the way. So that's something we need to think about as we're going through here, and that can help us to anticipate those difficult moments too. We want to adapt the general approach, thinking ahead together. If anticipating if the approach that's typically used is not going to be effective, and attend to access skills, which means that's a nice time to think about pre-teaching. If students don't have the skills necessary to access what we're going to be doing in the classroom that day, how do I bring them up to speed so we can get going? And then finding ways to boost participation. And anytime we implement a process in the classroom, we still want to have that the implementation cycle where we work through the process, implement the change, and assess the effectiveness of it. And that's where that progress monitoring loop continues for us. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, planning for SDI. And if you're interested, I know Ann Benninghoff's book, she does a nice job. She breaks apart each one of those steps to its individual components. It could be really helpful to go with. Okay. Next, please. So the learning targets, and this is something I guess just reminds me to talk about clarity of communication. So as we're talking about our expectations, the learning targets, the goals we're writing for students, be explicit as you can. What are we trying to get done today? Today, I want you to be able to write this out. I want you to be able to point to this piece. I want you, or draw this result or add it. So we're very clear about what our expectations are for that day and the learning target for that moment. So we have a clear understanding of whether we got there or not. So this, in terms of a lesson, thinking of learning targets, students will show, compute, or share are all really flexible because I have different interpretations I can do. There's lots of different things I can do to share. So what kind of sharing are we looking for from the student today? Specifically, what we'd like them to do or say or pronounce or diagram, being clear about the learning target. And then when we get into the processes, the next step are looking at some actual ways to deliver specially designed instruction. And I know we kind of touched on these briefly earlier in this, but we want to talk about them each individually here real quickly. And we talked about the I do, we do, you do concept with direct explicit instruction. We'll talk about self-regulated strategy for development, modeling, maintenance, and generalization, just to name those. So this is something that I think almost everybody learns this as you go through your college courses and you get your, or you've seen other people do it. And so you can see those components pretty readily when you watch someone else teach. But the big things to keep in mind when you do this is take your time with the process. Make sure students have the skills they need to access the content. They know what the goals are, the learning targets are, and you have something that brings them in, that connects grabs their attention, something that'll bring them in with you. Whether it's, hey, we're going to talk about this today, and it's related. We just had a Super Bowl Sunday, so we have something related to football, or how many yards, or those kind of things in math, and we're using what we've learned to address those kind of things. I think a lot of times we spend too little time on the modeling piece to make sure we show exactly what we want the student to do. And really, when we do the I do piece, it needs to be error-free. We're looking for the we do piece to be error-free. We need to be really clear on the process, showing exactly what we want students to do, how to get it done, show examples and non-examples, those kind of things. And the we do portion, that group work or small group work sometimes needs to be it needs to be error-free as well. We want them to get the skill to the point that we know that they understand it. And to keep in mind, when I see this most effectively done, it's when we have really good feedback from students, really good involvement, really good student engagement in the process, and it's really evident that the students are engaged. I want to see a right answer from everybody. I want to see the correct process from everyone. I want to see you compute the answer. I want to see you write down the correct response. I want to see everyone at least have that basic understanding before I turn it over to the you do piece. And you do independent practice, I guess it really should say with feedback there, because the important piece on this is homework is not you do. And I don't know, that might be opening a can of worms on that. Homework is just practice. And it's important that we independently independently practice a skill with good feedback so I can correct issues before they become habit. So it's important that we get that and good quality feedback, what the student's doing well and how to support them in that. Yeah, so some of these things, there might be new concepts as we're looking at this, but we know that direct explicit instruction is definitely specially designed instruction. Sorry, I'm clicking the screen trying to get it forward. I realize that's not going to help. Another way to look at this is self-regulated strategy development. Same kind of idea, same kind of concepts, just a little different approach. Make sure students have the background knowledge, discuss the strategy you're going to use, show them how to do the strategy, and memorize it. Especially, when we talked about those acronym-based tools. If I'm going to use them, I have to memorize something. And a lot of times we have boards up on the wall that remind students of what those skills are, but they do have to memorize the strategy. They have to recall it. So we work and we work and we work and repeat. And we have those, we can scaffold that with those different checklists or different visuals on the walls to support the student. But eventually we want to see them use that in different places. So that we're going to talk about independence and generalization a little bit also as we're going. Maintenance is just something that we do with cumulative reviews, those kind of things throughout the school year to make sure students are maintaining those skills. And if they're not, and here's the key, if we see students that are not maintaining skills, like a lot of times it's done in math, for example, that we're just going to check in and see, we worked on simple addition early on, we want to make sure we still have that skill. It's been a while since we looked at some division, for example. Let's just make sure that little review to make sure we're still doing okay with that. And just if we do those kind of things, circling back with students who need that support to make sure we're reinforcing that need, because that's something to keep going. So, and it's not a bad idea. I know this is big on data piece, but we need to check in and see. And as students are learning, as we're advancing to more skills, making sure they still maintain the basics of where it came from. Let me click the screen. So modeling, I know we touched on this. I'm not going to go too much into this piece, but it is scripted when you model something, and it should be as uninterrupted as possible. And then we repeat it with the student participation. So the first time through, I want to give them the whole thing. Here's the process. Here's what I'm going to show you how to do. Like the example we had, here's what I want to teach you how to do. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's the steps involved. And then we want to bring students in and giving them really good feedback as we're going through the process. So they're really clear. And that's the key on that feedback is that it is immediate, so that they can. That's great. I like your comment there, Alana, that we want to know that the students know before they leave. We got to make sure they've met the target, or we want to know where they're coming back, where we're going to start. So we'll make sure we do that. And I guess with modeling, it's important, again, to close with that summary. So I'm going to show you, we're going to do it together, and then I'm going to summarize what we've learned over the day. Here's what you're supposed to have learned today, and here's what you should have gotten out of that content. Here's the things that we're going to do next, sort of building up as we're going through. So, and then other strategies, I know obviously I can go on and on. Other strategies there, I think Katie mentioned chaining and backward chaining, showing the end result and showing the beginning steps and working from either direction. If you're looking for at least one place, and that's something I guess to throw out in the chat too. If you have other places you looked and found good evidence-based strategies, that'd be awesome if you could share those. I know we're always looking for good resources for this. One go-to for us is the What Works Clearinghouse. It's a federal run managed site that has all kinds of things you can search by, all those criteria I mentioned earlier on, the class size, the age level, the ability level, the content. You can search by all those different things and find evidence-based strategies there. You find the research behind it and how to perform it and who it's effective for. And it's a great resource for you. So if you're looking for evidence to support the instructional strategies you're using, that's a great piece. Generalization. This is something that Kay's moving me along. I think we're getting short on time. Yeah. I'm teasing. But as you're thinking about it, if you guys do have places you go to find strategies, share them with us here. This would be a great time to start. And actually, as you share things with us, if it's something we haven't, I guess, documented already, we'll make sure it gets into the Padlet too, so you can get to that later on from here. I should mention with generalization is an important thing. I always think of this in terms of behavior, because that's where it makes the most sense for me. If I teach a student like a calming strategy individually or in a small group, that's no guarantee it's going to work anywhere else. So we have to work on that process. What's it look like when I'm in a larger group or at recess? So we're going to talk to the student through those first and then let them experience those things safely. So those are some good things to keep in mind. And really even the money skills are one thing I struggle working with elementary age students. We work on the money in class, and then we have a little outing and go have the students buy something at an actual store, and it was amazing how many kids struggled with that. All the other things in that environment kept them from performing that task where they mastered in the classroom. So generalization is important. You can change all these little things to try different pieces. Just keep good data on what you're doing as you're moving forward. Go ahead. So I think we are kind of getting close on our time. So I'm going to do the sum up here, and we'll have some time for questions too, as we're or comments as we're going through this today. And, you know, it's important that remember that SDI has a balance between the standards and the unique learning needs of a student. So you have to think about how are we going to get the student with these unique learning needs access to and progress in the general education curriculum. It's a big conversation. It is, and I think we all talked about this, but you know, we don't have special education without specially designed instruction. It's a core piece of it. It's part of the definition. So it's the heart of what we do. So it's important we are clear on what it is. You know, it's not just the accommodations. It's not just the things that we provide. It's what we're doing as a group. So I don't want to leave you with the thought that it's just you as a special educator doing this work. It's us as an educational team that's doing the work. So as gen ed teacher, if I'm working with a gen ed teacher, we're gonna have to work together sometimes to get things done. If I'm working with a paraprofessional, one of us is going to have to be the observer or the person in observing that interaction. And what Katie mentioned this, but you know, when you think about that, with the paraprofessional, they're not there to make educational decisions. They're there to carry those things out. So you make the decisions, make the plan. Paraprofessionals get to carry those things out. If you're working with a general education teacher, it's not quite the same as a co-teaching relationship, but it's got some similarities. We're going to talk about those things and keep in mind that what's being delivered to that student is in addition to what everyone else is getting in the classroom. That's something I think is often not overlooked, but assumed that students with special needs can make progress if they just with their gen ed peers without support, and that's not necessarily the case. So we have to think about what does a student need. Gen ed teaching can deliver it, but it's in addition to what everyone else receives. So it's extra time. It's that additional instruction. It's a different way of instructing for that individual. Other kids can benefit from it, but this student must have it that way or they're not going to make progress. So, or at least not make the progress we want. And Katie has the references and resources are key. We have our books that we reference, some articles that we use. If you want to find out more about us, there's a QR code here for the IEPTA Center. And there's also, and if before you leave today, we'll put this, I put this link in the chat here for you also. But there's an evaluation form that we really appreciate, really more of a feedback form for us. So how did we do today? Are there other things you'd like to learn about or like to know from us? And I should mention, as a resource center, we are always here for you. So if you have questions, if you have needs, that's why we put our communication information right there in the presentation. So reach out to us with your questions if you have them. We'd be happy to touch base with you, whatever means works for you, whether it's just an email or text, or if we need, we can set up some virtual sessions if we'd like to. So anything, Alana or Katie, you'd like to add before we open it up for questions?